Hello and welcome to Business 360. I'm Shireen Bhan. The headlines we're tracking for you this evening. The sensex and the nifty dropped more than 1% in the first week of 2023. It's the worst start to a new year in the last 6 years. Stocks have also ended the fourth straight week with losses.
During the first 3 quarters of 2022, food price inflation in South Asia averaged more than 20%, and that's pretty high. The region's heavy dependence on imported fossil fuels has made it vulnerable to imported fuel inflation.
Taming inflation should be a policy priority for the South Asian region, says RBI Governor Shaktikanta Das. Warns that risk to growth and inflation outlook may rise if inflation persists at high levels. The Reserve Bank has hiked rates by 225 basis points in the last 8 months. The deadline to submit preliminary bids for IDBI Bank's disinvestment closes tomorrow. After multiple extensions, the government had thrown the net wide for private equity firms and alternative investment funds as well. The likes of JC Flowers, Carlyle, Fairfax, KKR, and even Japanese bank Sumitomo Mitsui may show interest in picking up stake. The government is considering another one-time amnesty scheme to reduce tax litigation. Tax Department studying possible contours to expedite more than 33,000 customs cases worth over 38,000 crore rupees. The scheme could be announced in the upcoming budget. That's an exclusive. The union government promises to follow timelines prescribed by the Supreme Court Collegium over appointment of judges and resolve the issue soon. The Apex Court says names of 22 judges have been sent back despite the Collegium's approval. The court will hear the matter on the 3rd of February. Russian President Putin orders a 36-hour ceasefire on the Ukrainian front line, cites Orthodox Christmas. Ukraine rejects the proposal. President Zelensky accuses Russia of wanting to use Christmas as a cover to stop the advance of the Ukrainian army in Donbas. 3 days on, and the U.S. House of Representatives is yet to elect a new speaker as Republican hardliners derailed Kevin McCarthy's bid for the 11th time. The paralysis over the election of the new speaker is the longest in the last 164 years. Well, let's kick things off on the Lal Street, where stocks have marked their worst start to a new year in the last 6 years. So today we saw the sensex below the 60,000 mark after losing nearly 2%. That's for this week. The nifty is down over 1% as both major indices ended in the red for the fourth straight week. Metals, banks, IT stocks were the worst performers. Prashant is standing by to wrap up the market action for us. Prashant.
Today was a sharp cut. The nifty lost quite a bit, just under 1%. Banks were lower, and across the board, there was more red than there was green. And this has been true for the last couple of days. Actually, 3 days in a row now, the nifty has been making, lower highs and lower lows as well, which is typically a bearish kind of signal. And today was no different once again. So the nifty, the bank nifty, both on your screen. By the way, within bank nifty, both PSUs and private banks did pretty poorly. IT as a sector did badly. It was a top losing sector. You had the metals, which lost. The dollar came back in a pretty impressive way last night, and it gained against a range of currencies through the course of the day, and healthcare as a space was under pressure as well. Large caps which lost: JSW Steel, IndusInd Bank, TCS, Bajaj Finserv, Tech Mahindra, to name a few. Market breadth was negative, 2.5:1 in favor of declines. LIC Housing, Dabur, GIC, RE, FACT, PVR, New India Assurance, some of these have done very well recently. They came under pressure. Karnataka Bank, GIC Housing, Ujjivan were some of the names which lost a fair bit. There were gainers as well. IDBI, of course, we've been on that story. KPIT Tech was a standout in a losing tech space. Sigachi was limit up. Godrej Industries, CEAT is something we highlighted in the morning, ended about 5% higher. Gati was up some 14%, and Radico, which had dropped into 3 digits, is back above the 1,000 rupee mark once again. So a lot of action in the broader markets as always. The nifty today came within 20 points of its December 26th low, which is 17,774, and then it bounced very nicely. So that becomes a level to watch. Later today in the US, we get the jobs number, which is always important. And then next week here, we have the IT services companies, which will start to report earnings. So, it's a power-packed kind of lineup in terms of events and happenings, which will dictate market price action from here on. Back to you.
All right, Prashant, many thanks for joining us. Now, high inflation continues to concern the RBI. Speaking at the International Monetary Fund event today, RBI Governor Shaktikanta Das said that taming inflation should be a policy priority for the South Asian region. The governor has also warned that risk to growth and inflation outlook may rise if inflation continues to be at elevated levels.
The first policy priority for the South Asian region is obviously taming inflation. Multiple external shocks in the form of COVID-related global supply chain disruptions, food and energy crisis following the war in Ukraine, and financial market volatility arising from the aggressive monetary policy tightening have exerted sustained price pressures in the South Asian economies, which is of course felt in other parts of the world also. For successful disinflation, credible monetary policy actions accompanied by targeted supply-side interventions, fiscal, trade policy, and administrative measures have become the key instruments.
Well, that is the RBI governor. Now, the deadline to submit preliminary bids for IDBI Bank's disinvestment closes on Saturday. That is the 7th of January, after multiple extensions, that is. Remember, earlier, the government had thrown the net wide for private equity firms and alternative investment funds as well. Sapna now joins us. Sapna, it's almost been a 7-year journey to get to this point as far as IDBI Bank is concerned. What can we expect?
The government is hopeful of strong interest in the preliminary bids for IDBI Bank, the deadline for which closes Jan 7. The government has thrown the net wide open for potential suitors and allowed banks, NBFCs and private equity firms to bid. Speculation is rife that PE firms like JC Flowers, Cali Group, Fairfax, KKR could show interest. There's also speculation that entities like the Mitsui Group could be interested. In fact, the proposal to privatize IDBI was first taken up by late Shri Arun Jaitley in his 16-17 budget, wherein he said government will consider the option of reducing stake to below 50%. But then the bank was already in distress. Along with massive capital infusion, in 2018, the government finally dialed LIC, which bought majority stake in IDBI Bank at a cost of over 21,000 crores at 61 rupees per share. In total, both government and LIC together infused over 43,000 crores in IDBI Bank in a span of just 3 years. With such large sums of capital infusion becoming unsustainable, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman in her FY22 budget speech reiterated government's aim to privatize IDBI Bank. After a gap of 20 months, the government in October 2022 finally invited preliminary bids for privatizing the bank. LIC and government jointly have now offered to sell around 61% stake in the bank.
All right, Sapna, appreciate you joining us. So Saturday, the 7th of January, that is when the preliminary bids for IDBI Bank will come in. The deadline expires. A day after Amazon announced that they are looking to fire over 18,000 employees globally, sources have told CNBC-TV18 that the decision will impact about 1% of its India workforce. We learned that around 1,000 employees of Amazon India will be impacted by these layoffs. Amazon India responding to CNBC-TV18's query, saying they don't have any additional information at the moment. In this space that we've been tracking, Vodafone Idea has reportedly reached out to a host of lenders for raising emergency loans worth over 7,000 crore rupees. According to an Economic Times report, the company has approached SBI, PNB, HDFC Bank and IDFC First, among others. The telecom giant plans to use a major portion of the loan for paying off dues to Indus Towers. According to the report, Vodafone Idea's monthly dues to Indus Towers currently estimated at 250 to 300 crores. Now, Reliance Jio, which plans to deliver 5G services across India by December 2023, has now rolled out its 5G network in Gwalior, Jabalpur, Ludhiana and Siliguri. With this, Jio services are now available in 72 cities, making it the only telecom operator to launch 5G services in Ludhiana. Bharti Airtel has also expanded its 5G footprint in Haryana, offering 5G services to users in Hisar and Rohtak. With this, Airtel users in 4 cities of Haryana, including Gurugram and Panipat, can now access the 5G network. The Supreme Court has expressed its concerns over the centre's delay in approving the appointment of judges as recommended by the Collegium. The Apex Court has noted that nothing can prevent appointments reiterated by the Collegium and has asked the centre to clarify on the delay. Ashmit joins us now with the details. Ashmit, take us through the Supreme Court's latest observations. This is, of course, a matter that has been going back and forth for a while.
Indeed, and Justice A.K. Kaul making his position quite clear on the matter, that he is not happy with the fact that the centre, in fact, has chosen to send back 22 names back to the SC Collegium for reconsideration. Now, the aspect that he took exception to is that these 22 names which have been sent back include names that have been reiterated not once but twice by the Supreme Court Collegium. Now, that is something that the Supreme Court said is not something that the centre can in fact pick and choose on. In fact, the Supreme Court said that the centre, it seems, is trying to pick laws which it can in fact work with and which it won't work with, and that is something that is simply not acceptable to the apex court. That's only part one of the story. The other half is the Supreme Court also in fact took exception to the fact that even in matters of transfer of judges, where the centre has a very limited role in terms of vetting the decisions taken by the Supreme Court Collegium, even there delays are being caused. Now, that, the Supreme Court observed, is merely an administrative issue. The centre has absolutely no role over there, and that there is no question as to why centre is taking time beyond the prescribed timelines. And speaking of the timelines, that is one thing that in fact the apex court expressed to the Attorney General, that that the Supreme Court hopes for his personal intervention in resolution of the matter so that centre complies with the prescribed timelines. The matter has now been referred for further hearing to February 3rd.
Now, the Supreme Court has transferred to itself all petitions seeking legal recognition of same-sex marriage. These pleas were pending in the High Courts of Delhi, Kerala and Gujarat. The apex court has said that petitioners who can't travel to Delhi can make submissions and appear for the hearings virtually. The petitions will be heard by the top court on the 13th of March. Clashes broke out between Aam Aadmi Party and BJP councillors, disrupting the Delhi mayor election process. The presiding officer was forced to adjourn the House even before the voting took place, as AAP and BJP councillors clashed over the order of oath-taking for nominated members. Councillors of both sides were seen hitting and pushing each other, hurling tables and chairs, even climbing on desks inside the MCD Civic Centre. The Lieutenant Governor will now set a new date to elect the mayor. The contest is between three candidates, two from AAP and one from the BJP. Bihar Chief Minister Nitish Kumar has announced that the state will conduct a caste-based census project from tomorrow. It is expected to be completed by May. The two-phase survey is set to cost the state around 500 crore rupees. Data will be collected digitally through an app and will be conducted from the panchayat to the district level. Russian President Putin has ordered a 36-hour ceasefire on the Ukraine front line on the eve of Orthodox Christmas. The order comes after a request from the top Orthodox leader, Patriarch Kirill, who is a staunch Putin loyalist. Ukrainian President Zelensky rejected the offer, dismissing it as a ruse to halt Ukraine's military advances. 3 days on, the U.S. House of Representatives is yet to elect a new speaker as Republican hardliners derailed Kevin McCarthy's bid for the 11th time. The paralysis over the election of the new speaker is the longest in the last 164 years. Well, we will head into a break, but up next, the government is considering another one-time amnesty scheme to reduce tax litigation. We discuss the likely contours and its impact with tax expert Dinesh Kanabar. A CNBC-TV18 exclusive coming up. Well, less than a month to go for the union budget, the government is considering another one-time amnesty scheme to reduce tax litigation. Sources say the tax department is studying the possible contours to expedite more than 33,000 customs cases worth over 38,000 crore rupees. The government has collected more than 90,000 crore rupees from dispute resolution schemes that were announced in 2019 and 2020. Timsy standing by with the details. Timsy, what stage is this proposal at, and can be expected to be introduced in the upcoming budget?
Well, sources are indicating that the government is considering to introduce a new one-time amnesty scheme to reduce litigation. Revenue Department is currently contemplating such a scheme for both direct and indirect tax disputes, and if approved, the schemes could be part of the budget announcements. According to sources, the idea is based on the past success of dispute resolution schemes which were announced in the past, such as SVL-DRS for indirect taxes and Vivad Se Vishwas for direct taxes. The proposal under works at CBDT is to give chance to taxpayers to come forward in the scheme on self-declaration, expanding the ambit of cases covered under appeals at various foras, allowing withdrawal of appeals on payment of full tax, interest and penalty, allowing amnesty with a penalty of 10% and 20%, depending where the cases are stuck. Similarly, in case of indirect taxes, the proposal is to cover custom duty dispute matters, again based on self-declaration, giving chance to taxpayers to come forward. Here too, the idea is immunity from interest and penalty in quantums depending where the matters are stuck and how much of the disputed amount the taxpayer is willing to pay. It is understood that over 33,000 custom duty cases are stuck in litigation worth about 40,000 crore rupees, and once such a scheme is approved, this could unlock a major value. Let's see what finally budget unveils for the industry and taxpayers.
All right, Timsy, appreciate you joining us. Joining us to take this conversation forward is Dinesh Kanabar, the CEO at Dhruva Advisors. Mr. Kanabar, many thanks for joining us. As we pointed out, we've seen amnesty schemes being announced by the government in 2019, then in 2020. And at this point in time, indications suggest that they could be working on another one. Your initial reactions to what you just heard?
Well, first, to be politically correct, there are no amnesty schemes because that's the proposition that the government has given to the Supreme Court to say we will not come out with any more amnesty schemes. The schemes which have come out really are very targeted. So if you take the Vivad Se Vishwas, was really to go back and say, if your matters are pending in litigation and you want to withdraw the appeals, then come forward, pay your taxes and withdraw the appeals, which is not exactly an amnesty scheme, but it's really going back to say, don't litigate. And again, I was reading Timsy's tweet, which made very interesting reading. So, for example, in the context of direct taxes, what she hears and what therefore could be under contemplation is that if you have got matters which are pending in appeal and you are litigating something and you think it's not worth your while, or there's a subsequent judgment which has come, which is unlikely to sustain whatever you are saying, then please pay your taxes, taxes and interest, and maybe you will not have to pay the penalty or a token penalty, etc. I think really what is needed, what has happened, Shirin, is that over a period of time, while the tax tribunal has become very robust, in fact, these days, when you file an appeal before the tribunal, it comes up for hearing within months in most locations. But there is a clogging at commissioner appeals level. It takes almost 15 years for a matter to be heard at the High Court, which is not a desirable thing. The government has done a few things, which is to set up those higher limits for threshold, etc., which has helped. But we really need to declog the system. And what I read from the tweet is to say that if you filed an appeal and you withdraw the appeal by paying interest and penalty, or other interest and taxes, that's a very, very welcome thing. It will declog the system. A couple of days ago, there was a statement by the finance minister that there are some trillions of rupees which are stuck up in tax litigation. The government can sort of recover some of those monies. So all in all, a very, very welcome thing. In fact, something which could be sort of an ongoing thing to say that if you are in litigation and you want to settle, please settle.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right in pointing out that this is not necessarily an amnesty scheme per se. It really is an attempt to try and end litigation and bring closure to uncertainty, which, as you point out, in some cases could go on for years, given the kind of clogging that you spoke of. But, you know, in terms of the contours, and we don't have the fine print of the details, this is still a matter under consideration and a proposal that's being drawn up. There have been previous recommendations made as well, for instance, by the Akhilesh Ranjan panel. You know, what do you believe the government will need to be mindful of to make this fly, if in fact it does come up with this?
So the Akhilesh Ranjan task force had come up with sort of a number of recommendations. And while these recommendations were never made public, but from what one picked on, that was very far-reaching. So in fact, that committee seems to have suggested a mediation, which is to say that if a tax officer comes back with a notice to say, here is a demand, you could actually enter into a negotiated settlement the way it happens in the UK and in certain other jurisdictions, and agree to settle the matter with the government. And that did not find favor. And I would like to believe that any suggestion which speaks of a settlement will not find any favor with the government, because that is likely to be challenged in future by the investigating authorities, whether there was a favor done, etc., etc. Whereas what we are now seeing, and which probably makes sense, is that this is a settlement under the scheme itself. So a tax officer has raised a demand. You have challenged the addition made before an appellate officer. You now think this is not worth doing it, and therefore you pay your taxes. Or matters have gone on for years, your company has grown, these sums are now inconsequential, you want to do an IPO, all of this litigation is becoming a challenge. Why not go and simply pay the taxes and settle the matter? Where things could be a little bit tricky is, for example, that SSC has won a matter before Commissioner Appeals. It is the tax office is before the tribunal, and there is a settlement. Then nobody would want to pay full taxes. So something like what was done in the Vivad Se Vishwas, where it was provided that if you have succeeded in the last appeal, pay 50% of the taxes, something like that could be a very, very welcome thing. But I don't think that the government will go as far as to accept a recommendation of a negotiated settlement, which is by definition subjective and not objective.
Right. Well, we will have to wait to see what the government finally unfolds and whether or not this finds its way into the budget. But Mr. Kanabar, always a pleasure. Appreciate you joining us here to take us through your reaction to the story broken by our colleague Timsy Jaipuria. And with that, it is time for us to wrap up this edition of Business 360. Thanks very much for watching. Do stay tuned. Our Friday favourite, the CNBC-TV18 Editors Roundtable, continues after this short break.